Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and today we'll be talking about something so important for our society and our people. And you're watching Muslim Network TV, and we are always there on Galaxy 19 satellite and muslimnetwork.tv, as well as amazon.com. Not Amazon.com, sorry, but Amazon Fire TV and Roku TV, as well as YouTube and other social media. Pretty soon we'll be on Apple TV as well. And Mujahid Talk is a talk show which talks about society, people, what's going on around us. So marches are still going on, 15 days. People keep marching. Last weekend was extraordinarily good. But as it always happens, soon it will fizzle out. So soon there'll be something else, some other news item. Media will first postpone it a little bit, then it will go on the second pages of the newspaper, if it at all. And in the news on television, it will disappear. Then what? Are these deaths, hundreds of people getting injured, and literally tens of thousands of them being detained, all in vain? What about translating this anger into energy and change for the society which can last? What about changes in each city? Chicago spends almost half of its budget on policing. New York has $6 billion budget, and they're talking about reducing it by $1 billion. But that's a huge thing. And New York is the city where we first time heard, "I can't breathe." And that person passed away in the chokehold. Is it possible that at least the cities can ban chokeholds and strangleholds and these type of things? Is it possible? Can we work on it? What about changes in the state policing? And what about all those laws are being discussed at the federal level? Democrats in Congress just revealed sweeping legislation aimed at combating excessive use of force, racial discrimination by police, and making it easier to identify, track, and prosecute misconduct of police. And it's probably going to be the widest possible federal intervention into policing, which goes on at the local level. And Republicans in this election cycle want to show that they are concerned. So Republicans have appointed Senator Tim Scott, the only Black Republican senator, to lead this effort. We don't know if this legislation will pass or not. If it passes, question is how good will it be? If it does pass, it is good. How well will be its implementation? So the question for the Muslim community, are we good neighbors? Are we good citizens to stand up and engage our neighbors, develop coalition, be part of it? So we bring about a change. Can we be good Muslim to engage with others, to bring about the real change in the lives of Blacks and other minorities? These are the questions. Can we grow up? Well, physically, we continue to grow, and I'm getting quite old in growing up. Maybe one of these days I will stop growing. But all of us together, as a Muslim, as a neighbor, as a citizen, can we do something about it? To discuss these things with me is one Imam and one activist. Imam Yusuf Rios is from Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. He's from Cleveland, Ohio, and has a BA from Western Philosophy and Sociology from John Cornell University, and is working on Masters in Islamic Science at the Islamic University of Minnesota. He has served as an instructor with the Islamic American University, Al-Huda University, Guidance College, and Shawkani Institute, and is also involved in social media project as well as chaplaincy work with incarcerated youth, and university students. His current focus is on 3 Puerto Rican Imam project for relief in Puerto Rico, and he has traveled to Puerto Rico twice since Hurricane Maria. During this first visit, he partnered with ICNA Relief to assess the damage, the most devastated areas of island, and coordinate efforts for future relief. Imam Yusuf Rios, you have been involved in relief, but you are involved in teaching and these things as well. What is your assessment? Are Muslims really engaged? Are they doing better when it comes to connecting with the people around them in coalition for a lasting change?
Yeah, currently I'm in the Chicagoland area, and I'm working with the ICNA Project, Islamic Learning Foundation as well. So that has provided me an opportunity to go into Chicago and to kind of assess where the Muslims are and participate in the protests and demonstrations and so on and so forth. There's a major disconnect between the Muslim community and this issue overall. You know, I think that the issue about what does it mean to be a good neighbor is central to all of this. What does it mean to be part of the society is central to this topic. There's a lot of debate internally in the community with regard to what should be done and what are our obligations and so on and so forth. But we just don't see the involvement that we would like to see of the Muslim community. There's a massive disconnect. I think that many of the more youth are more in tune, and some of the older activists across cultural lines, they get it. But the majority seem to be disconnected and seem to have been taken by surprise.
So it seems you're not quite satisfied with the quality of Muslim speak engagement at this moment. But do you think more and more people, is the trend in the right direction from your perspective?
Yeah, I think overall the civic engagement piece is problematic. You do a lot of work in that regard, so you have an understanding as well, from your side. But I think the direction is needed. The direction that this is going in is needed in order to bring about some real systematic change. So there are some positive things that are taking place, but the momentum needs to continue, and there has to also be an understanding of how to engage at multiple levels, because it's not just being on the street, as you know. And this is what is lacking overall. There's people on the ground that are directing systematic change. They have clear demands, but in order to keep the energy directed properly, there has to at some point in time be some coordinated efforts and more organization on the legislative front, especially. But the pressure is on, and it's forcing some legislative change. But I think that the complaint about older activists with regard to younger activists is that there's not enough organization and leadership among the younger activists.
Well, that's surprising that the older people are complaining about younger people. Well, nothing new in my eyes about that. But aren't the younger people raised by the older people? So maybe they raised it in that particular way. Well, that is, I think, appropriate time to bring in a younger person in the discourse, and that is Aminah Ahmed. Aminah, welcome.
Welcome,
Aminah.
Assalamualaikum, peace be upon you all.
Aminah Ahmed is a young activist and inspirational speaker. She's an advocate against human rights violations. Aminah is co-founder of the Art as Resistance. Art as Resistance, I like that. In honor of Shaheen Bagh. Shaheen Bagh is a garden area in New Delhi where Muslims were standing and resisting the discriminatory policies by the Indian government. She has coordinated and facilitated town halls on the conversation of identity, race, and diversity. He has memorized the whole Quran. My goodness, may God bless you. Amina is a junior in high school and aspires to become a criminal defense attorney. Um, um, Amina, Imam is saying that older people are complaining about younger people. Imam, if you're typing something, we can hear that. So that activity, if it is coming, there is some sound coming from your side. So if you leave that, it will be better. So what about this? I mean, older people are complaining that younger people are not doing their job.
You know, like you said, it's not anything new. It's something that, we're always complaining on both sides, right? But I see where he's coming from, because in the youth, in our community, we had this issue of passive activism, which I'm, very active on social media. And I see this happening a lot, where people are retweeting a Black Lives Matter post, or they're just tweeting hashtag Black Lives Matter. We had this new trend of people just posting a black box, and that's wonderful, right? You're helping raising awareness, but what is that actually doing? Is that bringing it about actual change? We need to move past this passive activism, this culture of trying to just show yourself as woke, right? As being aware of current events. That's amazing, but you can't just stay there, right? You have to move on from that. There's actual groundwork that needs to be done aside from just protesting, and young people need to focus on that.
Oh, passive activism. Well, isn't that what social media is about? Everybody up and high, okay, I need to be on social media. Why this is thing not on social media? Why I didn't see it anywhere? So I thought social media is helping organize, but you seems to disagree.
I think social media is a very good outlet, and it's good because we talked about my Art as Resistance campaign, and I've got artists from all around the world to contribute just through social media. So social media can be used for good, but we can't just end there, right? You can't just tweet something and post something and just call it a day, feel proud of yourself, give yourself some self-validation and just sit down, right? There's so much work that needs to be done. As young people, we need to connect with our elected officials. We need to join campaigns. And, Imam Mujahid and I were speaking earlier on the Bernie campaign. Why was there so much support for Bernie? But, Bernie supporters are disappointed right now. There's a reason for that. That's because we didn't actually go out and do enough, as a community, as young people. We've done a lot of talk, but not a lot of doing.
So, yeah, I mean, the Bernie Sanders thing, we will come to that because everybody was saying Bernie Sanders will be carried on the shoulders of the younger people. There were no shoulders to be found on the voting days. We'll come to that. But how many Muslims do you know, Imam, personally, who went and participated in the recent protest campaign?
Not many at all. To be honest with you, not many at all. Not many at all went to participate. I think that this is a different set of circumstances because of the COVID-19 quarantine. And then at the same time, people are still trying to figure out, what are these protests looking like? These protests haven't been, the quality of these protests hasn't been seen in decades, meaning that there's force being used in these protests. This is not like you go downtown and you just, you voice your concern, and that's it. There's at times there's violence, there's people that are being arrested. It's a whole different dimension. So, but I have not seen many Muslims at all participate.
So, Amina, did you see some Muslim? Do you know some Muslim who went for protest other than me? That is.
I think that this is the time where I'm going to give some credit to our young people. We've seen a lot of young people going out to protest, and I've had some backlash from elders where they're telling me, why are young people going out to these protests? These are unsafe, and it's not the time to be protesting. And to that I say, it is definitely the time to be protesting right now. We're seeing Black people being murdered, being subjected to police brutality, and if we do not protest right now, nothing is going to change. So yeah, young Muslims are out there. They're at the forefront of these protests, and I hear this statement a lot, right? We're bringing a voice to the voiceless. And I want to say that no, we're not doing that. These voices have existed for more than a century. We're only attempting to amplify the voices that already exist. And the Muslim youth are doing a phenomenal job at doing that.
So, well, let's talk about, in civic engagement, there are a whole lot of things. So we're going to take a short break right now. And we come back, I would like to ask, protest is one type of civic engagement, and then engagement with the elected officials, participation in campaigns is another step. So let's discuss that. You're watching Muslim Network TV. And we are on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as Muslim Network.tv, Amazon Fire TV, and Roku. We'll be right back after these messages. Okay, can you request Imam to, he's typing, he's thinking. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. And thank you so much, Imam, being with us. And thank you so much for Aminah. You know, one of the things of civic engagement is, of course, participating in protests. The other part is is engaging in electoral process and with candidates and things like that. Now, Bernie Sanders examples you gave. Bernie Sanders seems to have quite a bit of Muslim support, and a whole lot of people voted for him, definitely. But it is estimated that the higher turnout of younger people, which were supposed to be tilting balance in his support as compared to the older people, didn't quite take place. Is that true, or it's just not quite true?
I think the statistics are there, right? Young people, I said this before, we do a lot of talking, but when it's time to show up, we're not doing that. And I'm not 18 yet. I'm 16 years old, right? I'm going to be a junior in high school, and I wish I could go out to vote, right? That's something that I can't do. That's a civic duty that I'm not able to fulfill. But I would urge the young people to do that. That is a basic civic duty that as a Muslim, we should be going out and voting. But if it's not happening, that's something that we really need to be encouraging and pushing in our own communities, especially to the young people.
Okay. If you both don't mind, I'm getting constant typing sound or some sound which is coming out to everyone. So it may be our chair or something, but we need to be little, everybody's watching this show. So somehow we need to control the sound coming out. It's a ticking sound which is repeatedly coming. So we need to engage in this conversation because we will have to edit this portion out now, unfortunately. But we need to see there's a whole lot of people who watch these programs. They go in our stock as well. So she is young and cannot vote. But Imam, how is the Latino votes? I mean, in Texas and in Florida, of course, in California also, there's a large number of Latinx. Are they engaged in voting process?
The Latino community is again, because it has its own internal diversity. It's difficult to gauge right now what is the case given the COVID situation. Given what happened with the COVID, we don't know how many people would have actually gone out to be supportive, and they didn't go out. But there's a segment of the Latino community which they would like to participate politically, but they can't participate because of their legal status. And then there's a segment of the population that is very passive. It's not, so the Latino community is not as politically active as we would like, although it has a long tradition of political activism. If you take the Puerto Rican community by itself, there's a massive difference. There's about 5 to 6 million Puerto Ricans at fluxes because of the situation of migration right now on the U.S. mainland, and there's about 3.5 million Puerto Ricans on the island of Puerto Rico. And the political culture in Puerto Rico is much more strong and engaged on the island than it is here, but they don't have the right to vote for the president. So there's always been this discussion of how to engage that community here, because there's such a large number. How can you get it politically active? So I think that's the issue with the Latino community, legal status, and getting people to be involved, getting people to be more involved. But it's not what we would like at all. Is the numbers are far from where we need them to be of engagement.
So Latinx community in general, but what about the Latinx Muslim community? I mean, they have their organization and their voices and their system. Are they speaking up for the rights of those who cannot vote? For example, undocumented worker and immigration right is a major issue in this election. Are you listening to Latino media? Is media encouraging side? Is there a movement that this 2020 election is going to be extremely critical for the Latino community?
I think, in specific, I have been trying to push the political engagement and social involvement on a personal level. It's not where it should be, because the Latino Muslim community is reformulating itself. It's not necessarily a new community, because, almost 50 years back, the Latino Muslims were established in New York, and they were extremely politically active, but it kind of faded away. But it's not at the level that it needs to be, and that's in part because what you're talking about is a convert community. And so people are trying to figure out what their identity is under this new set of circumstances, and that is coming into a new religion. Another thing is that the Muslim community itself is confused at times with regard to its teachings. So this creates a situation for the teachings of political engagement and social involvement and so on and so forth. So that creates a set of basically conflicts and confusion for converts. So that creates a problem for creating a Latino Muslim community to be engaged, right? Because people are trying to figure out their identity, and also they're trying to figure out what is correct practice. So we Muslims have to be clear on what our civic duties are and how to politically engage. That way, when people are converting or coming into Islam, they're not confused as to how they can participate. Just like the same thing with the youth. I believe that the issue of the youth not being or the youth engaging in passive activism has a lot to do with the fact that they have not properly been supported to understand how to engage the system. And I think if they had an understanding of how to engage the system, it would be a lot different. And the youth suffer the same things that the converts suffer. There's confusion in the Muslim community about civic engagement within the context of American society.
Yeah, and I'd love to add to that, because a lot of Muslim parents, they'll approach me after like a speech at a protest or a fundraiser, and they'll say, why does my child not want to participate? And if you've never been a role model for them, if you've never encouraged them to participate, why do you have that expectation that, suddenly and magically they'll just go and participate? We have to follow the footsteps of our elders, and that's what usually we follow by example. And our parents and our elders need to lead by example and need to guide us for real.
Okay, so what teachings, Imam Yusuf, do you use from Islamic heritage to tell people to encourage them for participation in the society?
Well, we have, I try to I try to come at this from two approaches. One, I try to come at this from the understanding of the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a whole. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he began his journey to engage revelation. His journey to the cave of Hira was one in which he was looking for solutions to the problems of his society. This was in the month of Ramadan before revelation. So if you go to some of the books of Sirah or the books of the biography of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you will find like Rahika Makhtum, the sealed nectar. You will find that there's maybe one or two lines, but it shows that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was dismayed, he was disoriented about the conditions of his society and his people and his community and what was going on, and he was not at that time yet a prophet. And so I mentioned to Muslims that, look, this was the initial orientation, that our spirituality is one which is rooted in trying to find solutions to the problems that we're finding in our society, so that we can grow. The other thing that I say is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tried to build a community that was pluralistic. It was not him who decided for that society of Medina not to be pluralistic, but he extended the invitation to build a just society that was pluralistic to other faith communities, and they opted to break those contracts that they initially had, agreed to. So if you look at Medinan society, or if you look at Meccan society, the Prophet ﷺ was constantly engaged in dealing with the social reformation. And the reason why I come in at that approach is so that we don't necessarily fall into the issue of debating on technicalities. But there's other traditions, like the obligation to enjoin the good and forbid the evil, or change or bring about change, that we're obligated to bring about change in a number of different ways, given what is considered legitimately Islamic and was appropriate for the time. But because, again, we have this issue where we still have not overcome the idea that there's a Muslim world and a non-Muslim world. Many Muslims don't find themselves with the understanding that they should be committed to the society that they live in, because they consider it a non-Muslim society, and they don't see that they have an obligation. So we have to, when we start talking about the issue of Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Kufr and so on and so forth, we have to be clear that Islam is Risalatun Alamiyya. It's a universal call and a universal message, and it was never really bound by geography until later day Muslims, they kind of established that in tradition. But the revelation itself is universal, and it's for all times and all places. And so I tried to teach from these principles that we have to have that understanding that Islam is not just for one segment or one geography of the world. And so we have to be committed as well to more than just one geography, because we're living all over the world. And so because we carry the teachings of Islam, that means that whatever geographical zone that we're in, we have to participate in whatever capacity it can bring about the most amount of good. But that's the approach that I take to try to remove myself from the controversies that are limiting us in political participation. The way that we're understanding our religion is such that we are using it to disengage, and we're using it to isolate ourselves. Like recently we were trying to do a food drive, and there was opposition that came from a Muslim leader, and he asked, who is this food drive for? And when it was mentioned that it was for elderly non-Muslims, he said, we don't service that community. We only service the Muslims. And so although we on this panel here, we don't have that understanding, and we have the right understanding because we believe Islam is for all of humanity, and we engage, there's still some segments of the Muslim community that have to be challenged on their understanding, and they have to be told that it's an incorrect understanding. Because those teachings how they understand those teachings of Islam is one that limits engagement, and they use religiosity to block civic engagement and social reform, and for Muslims to participate and be integral to the society. And I just wanted to note on this point, this is part of the problem of not understanding the history of Islam in the Americas. When we don't understand the history of Islam in the Americas properly, we have a tendency of making Islam foreign, and because it is not indigenous. But we know that Muslims have been in these lands for hundreds of years, and if we foreignize Islam, it just gives this idea that Islam is this thing that really doesn't belong here. And if we have that attitude of not being engaged, then what it does is it undermines our ability to be part of the society and seek justice, because then you have people that are supporting isolating themselves, or social isolation or social disengagement, and then also you have a society which is psychologically impressing on the Muslim community and on the general society that Muslims are foreigners, they don't belong here, this is a strange religion. So I believe that we have to change the discourse, and is a priority, and we have to change our understanding and provide the community with tools to engage.
I think the direction probably is right. People who used to be skeptic like that is going down and down in number and learning. Would like the process to be better. I remember there was a rally in downtown Chicago for Palestine, and and one imam slapped a young boy because he brought the Palestinian flag in the rally, because that imam thought the flags are haram. And after 9/11, when in that mosque, not many people were going. I went there and asked my children to go there. When I approached the mosque, at the top of the dome was American flag. I said, "Oh boy!" So finally, they have learned some lesson. And so there are people. I mean, when you study Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nowhere taking care of the poor is connected with their faith. Not at all. Actually, God Almighty doesn't mention that. There's not a single hadith which connects it that you must take care of your own people, not the general society. So right of poor, justice, rights of neighbors, not a single hadith or the verse of the Quran which limits it to Muslims. But unfortunately, people do. That's why I wrote an article, actually, the misconceptions among Muslims about the social services. And I think I wrote it about 20 years ago. So things have improved substantially. But you're right, some people continue to confuse these things. And you're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with a young activist, Aminah Ahmed, as well as Imam Yusuf Rios, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching us on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as muslimnetwork.tv and Amazon Fire TV and Roku. Yusuf, you were mentioning there are issues of concern. I think one thing is that my methodology was write articles and educate people or give khutbas about it. I normally use chapter Small Kindness Al-Ma'un to talk about how one's test of faith is connected, how good we are in service towards neighbors, and how good we are in terms of connection with God Almighty. So educational tools are many, but if there is a particular imam or a leader in the community, elders. I know you were first complaining about younger people are not civic engaged, and now you are telling me the problem with the older people, that they are teaching a strange type of thing. What about entering one-on-one dialogue with people like that? So they understand that there are people watching and there is an Islamic argument against what they are saying.
I think, personally, because of the conditions that we're living under right now, they're so dire. We've never been in a time period where we are seeing the degree of suffering globally that we're seeing today. So what becomes the case is that people in different places of the world are experiencing high degrees of hardship, right? So I think the priority in wajib al-waqt, or the obligation of the time right now, it becomes to identify what's the path of least resistance. So I really think that it's important to engage people on a one-on-one level. It's important to try to alter or influence the general community, general Muslim community. But we really have to focus on the willing. We have to identify the willing, and where I get that logic from. And I'm always humbled by it, because when you fail, you ask yourself, why am I failing? And we're talking about trying to initiate change in the Muslim community. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the earliest generation, they handpicked people. They handpicked people to build, people to be servant leaders and so on and so forth. So I think that really, to bring about the change, like you mentioned, the issue of education, we have to be able to combine knowledge and action. And so we need to really focus on leadership development, which is not about the title. It's more about who will take on the responsibility, who will be in charge of initiating that change. So I think that becomes more appropriate for the time. And then pushing for change from the minbar. But I think the time, because of the conditions that we're living under, we need more and more people to be engaged. So we need to especially focus on the willing, whether they're older or younger, but especially the younger generation, because a lot of us are gray. And so we need to train them and give them the tools, and also let them learn from experience. And the same thing with imams. Imams have to get out there. Imams have to be on the ground. They have to get that exposure and that experience, because that's different than, and you know that from your experience, that's different than thinking about it. When you get on the ground, you're challenged in different ways. And then when you go to write, your writing is a lot different, because you have that experience of what it means to actually be engaged. And I think that that's the dilemma of where Islamic knowledge is at today. The Imam training has to be completely transformed. It's too theoretical, and is removed from the context of life. And
Now,
so
are
we
you
need
saying that
to
based
give them
on the
opportunities.
institutions you have been part of? I mean, in your bio, there are 3 institutions where you are part of. So based on that knowledge, you are saying that, Imam's training is more theoretical than the practical issues?
Yes, then practically being involved, and the Muslim community also has created that situation for the imams. Like I was initially studying to be a Catholic priest. So within the Catholic system, and even within the Protestant system, and even within the Jewish system, there's continuing education. And so we the way that we have kind of created a situation which ties the hands of the imams. We limit the imams. We don't allow them to be leaders. They're more like employees or functionaries. And so that doesn't allow them to totally be engaged either. The culture in the Muslim community is not allowing leadership to really emerge from these imams, so that when they do speak from the minbar, they're speaking from experience, and they're speaking with strength. So the education system needs to change. It needs to require, for people to actually be on the ground, volunteer and participate, be involved with civic society, get out of the Muslim community completely, be involved with people that you don't agree with, people that are against your own morality, and deal with them, and find their humanity, and try to see what's going on. See, go to the homeless, go to the elderly, go to these different communities, deal with different groups that are oppositional to where you're at, so that you can understand where society is at, deal with different generations even, so that we can get an experience of learning. And then challenge the Muslim community with how things are being done. And this should, of course, it would be ideal that we do this as a jama'ah, as a group, you know what I'm saying, versus just an individual. But unfortunately, with the way that things are today, there's so much opposition. That's why I said we don't have a lot of time to waste. We're living in critical times, and so we need people to really plan and strategize and develop themselves and engage and deal with those who are willing. But we don't have time to debate with each other. That becomes the issue.
So, Aminah, what do you think about what Imam's reflection are on this issue? Are you ready for the whole challenge out there?
I think the Imam talked about ideally we should do this collectively, right? But obviously we don't have those resources right now. We're not in a situation, I feel like, as a community to be doing that. But what we do need to do is address the racism, the colorism in our own communities, right? The misogyny in our own communities needs to be addressed. I always say this because, I'm originally from India. My grandfather immigrated to this country, and the British colonized India, right? And they left, but they colonized our brains in a way too. We have certain standards and ideologies because of that colonization, and that has not left, right? We still think the same way, and that goes back to the racism in our community. Whereas Islam, forbids racism. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not commit injustice. And that is what racism is. You're committing injustice on another person. So what we need to do is confront the racism in our community. I had a family friend, an auntie. She's a kind individual, but she told me that, I was at the store and I felt very afraid. And I asked her, why? Was there a reason to feel fear? And she said, there was a black man near me and I was holding my purse. And I said, okay, so, carry on with the story. What happened? And she said, nothing. And I said, so you were just afraid because there was a black man near you? You were afraid because of the color of his skin, right? You were criminalizing him and he had done nothing. So that's something that is very prominent in our community, where there's racism that's big, at a macro level, and also subtle racism. When an auntie says a racist comment, as young people and even as elder people, we need to stand out, because sometimes when I do it, people will be like, I think that's disrespectful. Just don't confront it. Don't say anything. Whereas if an elder uncle or an auntie would address it with me and support me, maybe I would come across as a little bit less disrespectful. But as of now, I don't mind. I don't mind confronting the racism and how they will perceive me once I do so, because we need to do that. We need to be confronting it head on.
I 2/3 of my life, actually all my life, 40 years in Chicago, I live in either total 90% Black community, or at least more majority Black community. And when people come from North Side to meet with me, first question they ask, are you safe here? We do associate suicide and Blackness with crime, and but younger people have different attitude. Younger people are more open and more critical of the wrong policies. But the problem is the younger people, older people for decades vote more often than younger people who are eligible. But there is a good news out there as well. The Tufts University has done a survey of younger people, and they found that in 2018 elections, they played a significant role in that election. And we don't know what role they're going to play in 2020, because Bernie is crying they didn't come out for him. So what is it Muslim community, to your knowledge, is doing now? You have a massive campaign which parallels a campaign of 1960s for civil rights. In this massive campaign, are there coalition Muslims are part of? Of course, I am and Justice for All, they are part of that coalition. But what and number two, what are they thinking and planning for the inspiring more younger people and more Muslim community and more Latino community to vote in the forthcoming election? So a whole lot of questions. Feel free to jump in and dwell on it.
Yeah, the number one thing that we need to be doing is joining local campaigns, right? Local elected officials are so underrated, but they are so important. And I think the Muslim community overlooks them far too often. We have nonprofits such as Niyama, right? And they are a Muslim political coalition organization, and we need to be supporting these organizations and be at the forefront when they're supporting our elected officials. Writing an email and communicating with local elected officials is so easy now because we have technology and social media. We need to be taking advantage of that. And in terms of what the Muslim community is looking at for the future, what are they doing and what should they be doing to get young people involved? I would say that the most effective thing is when you already have a young person, and giving that young person a platform inspires other young people right away, right? I've had so many moments where young people come up to me and they're like, how do I get involved? I want to get involved. And it's just we're not giving them enough platforms, and that's what the elders need to do along with the young people. We need to work together to get other young people who wish to get involved but just don't have that opportunity. We need to be giving them opportunities. It's important that they are able to have their voices heard. We always complain in our community that young people aren't getting involved, but when are we giving them platforms to get involved, right? I'll have people come up to me after, speeches and fundraisers, and they'll say, "Oh, Amina, I thought you were going to introduce the next guest, not be the speaker. I thought you were going to introduce the next speaker." And obviously, that has no malintent behind it, and I don't take offense to it. But it comes from that same ideology. It stems from that same thinking that young people aren't capable. And for a long time, I didn't tell people that I'm 16 years old. I didn't tell people that I'm going to be a junior in high school. I never brought that up because I thought that they would undermine, what we're able to do. But I want to tell you that young people have a drive and a passion, and we can't let it burn out. We have to allow it to develop.
So, Imam, what are the activities which Imams and the Masjid community and organizations have to give a space to younger people who are trying to get engaged in the society instead of giving them lectures?
I think that's we have a deficit in that. We're very limited in that because the culture. I remember some years back. It's probably been about 15 years now. Uh, One of the younger brothers who was a community organizer with one of the institutes, he would bring the youth that were working in the these stores that are in the inner city. He would bring them to the masjid for tahajjud and playing basketball. And the culture of the masjid was that the masjid is just a place that you pray. So they broke a door. And because they broke a door, the youth immediately, all of that effort that their younger brother made to create a space for those youth that are basically all out on the streets, Muslim youth, because all they're doing all day long is they're in the marketplace in the inner city, and it's not very suitable for their own development, and they were banned from the masjid. So that's an example of how we ourselves as a community, and I'm critical on these points because we need to be critical to say that no, we haven't created this space, not only for young people but for women and for diversity of opinion and so on and so forth. But we haven't created the space for the young people that's necessary for their growth. And that's something that has to be done. And this is one of the reasons why we have the unmasked movement, why the majority of the Muslim community and the youth are not in the masjid. They're outside of the masjid. But what we have done, for instance, here with Islamic Learning Foundation, last summer, we had a program for the youth, and we took them to you, Imam Malik, so that they can be trained or oriented in civic engagement. And then we gave them opportunities and spaces for them to be able to develop themselves with the hope and the intention that they will get this understanding of Islam, that they have a space, that they can be engaged, that they can deal with their elders. It's not it's not just a generation gap and there's no way of bridging it. And trying to work through that, but it's very difficult. There's a lot of opposition, and so we have to create new spaces. That's why I said we don't have time. This is one of the issues that I was saying. We don't have time. Some communities have lost 2 generations already because the older generation has blocked them from really participating. And I myself have had that experience. I've learned to deal with the older generation, but I myself have been blocked by the older generation many times from really participating. And so you have people that are 50 years old. I hear that from some of the brothers, and they have to contend with some of the older brothers that have locked down a lot of the platforms. So the millennials, there's a lot of complaints about them, but I'm very hopeful in them. But I just still think that they need the tools, and that's kind of what we have to fight for, is to give them the tools and to create the space, or to fight for new space for them to be able to take the lead. And we have to have the philosophy of passing the baton.
Yeah.
The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if he would have trained the companions the way that we're dealing with the youth, Islam would have been finished, because the companions would have not had the skills and the ability to be in that servant leadership role. And this is what the disservice that we're doing to our youth. We're not creating that type of situation.
Thank you so much, Imam Yusuf Rayo, and thank you so much, Aminah Ahmed. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. We're on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as Amazon Fire TV, Roku TV, and Muslim Network.tv, and pretty soon on Apple TV as well. Thank you so much for watching. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.
Alaikum salam.